Feeling nothing you do matters because of cynicism is letting down those you could be helping, perpetuating the problems of the world, and keeping you feeling like shit. Wow, that's harsh. But that was me until I learned to walk towards the fear and tell my story. I literally spent decades isolating myself, both emotionally and literally, spending 20 years on the edge of the Colorado wilderness. After falling into a belief that people suck, I didn't want to bring down everyone around me with my bad attitude. Having felt utterly alone in the metropolis of Denver, I figured it would be easier to actually be alone in nature for a couple years. But that plan backfired, and 2 decades later, it almost killed me. How did this happen? I grew up an optimist, believing that people are inherently good and motivated for the betterment of all humankind, that they cared about life, all life, and honesty and discovery. All the humanistic values my Unitarian Universalist preacher dad taught me. I just assumed that everyone felt that way. So I wore my heart on my sleeve and I trusted everyone. A formula for disaster for this sensitive guy. I had to endure a lot of bullying as a kid. I remember one day in particular, after walking home from the 3rd grade, crying to my mom about how mean the other kids were to me. My mother, feeling desperate to help, told me that when I grew up, things would be better. That wasn't exactly true. My father, the Reverend, taught me the enlightened principle of pacifism, and I took to heart this practice of nonviolence resistance. In the 8th grade, I tried to talk my way out of fights, but trying to teach enlightenment to the local bully is a good way to get beat up, and I did. One day, this bully in my PE class showed up at the ice skating rink where I was learning to figure skate. Not hockey, figure skate. The verbal abuse began almost immediately. Sissy, pussy, fag, insults he spat at me like clearing phlegm out of his throat. I did my best to ignore him, but he accused me of making him fall during one of my sissy tricks and making him look bad in front of his girlfriends. So he was going to teach me a lesson by giving me one good punch. But catching me on the ice wasn't going to happen. I mean, this was my turf. But once I took off my skates, I was once again small and vulnerable. I told him I wouldn't fight him as other kids started flocking around me. Said if he felt he needed to, quote, teach me a lesson, then to just hit me and leave. Well, he hit me, but leaving isn't what bullies do. He felt he didn't hit me hard enough, so I took a second punch in the face, smack. Again, I asked him to leave, since now I've endured his punishment twice. But he wasn't satisfied, saying I deserved to be hit even harder. So again, I stood there and I took it as he threw his whole weight into it. Smack! Blood came from my lip as I staggered backwards, dazed. One of his friends said, "Come on, he's not going to fight you." They left spewing more insults and they walked away and I turned and ran the half-mile home, my face throbbing from the beating. I cried the rest of the day. 3 days later, I had to again face this bully in my PE class, and to my surprise, he didn't say a word, and I never again had any encounter with him. Does this mean I won? My male identity was again challenged when my oldest sister, who at the time I described as my radical gay sister, made damn sure I knew just how much men sucked. The argument was that men are aggressive and exploitive and only wanted one thing on their minds, while women are these gentle, nurturing goddesses. Eventually, I started feeling that women suck too. And where does that leave me? People suck. So I learned the only way to avoid conflict and not to suffer the abuse of others is to physically isolate myself. This too, though, is a form of violence, self-inflicted and fostering a feeling that there was something wrong with me, that nothing I did was going to matter. Still, there was a part of me deep inside that didn't believe it. By my mid-40s, I was emotionally dead in the sticks of South Central Colorado and knew I needed to reach out or literally die. Despite my cynicism, I knew it wasn't the fault of the people around me for my wounded soul, that they didn't deserve my disdain, any more than I deserved theirs. So I made an effort and started volunteering at the community radio station and getting involved with other groups that aligned with my values. Still, I was struggling with feeling disconnected from the human race. Then I had a life experience that started to shift my perspective. My friend of 20 years, Purple, got cancer and ended up in hospice. For the next 8 days, I was by her side until the end. Each moment took on a special significance, and I knew there was nowhere more important for me to be. There was a belonging and direction I had been seeking all my life. A week later, a very special experience was over, and it changed me forever. Life was okay for a while, though sad for losing my friend. And I felt I knew more than ever what was important in life. But eventually all the cynicism of my earlier life started to intrude into my consciousness again. It took leaving my self-imposed purgatory and moving to Bloomington, Indiana before I started turning things around again. I made my people connections my most important priority. The cynicism and distrust of people was still palpable, but I took small steps, doing things that were meaningful to me. I got involved in my UU church, volunteered with hospice, and started buying online training programs and getting mentors to start developing my leadership skills. Instead of succumbing to feelings of hopelessness, I leaned into them, and slowly I changed the story I had told myself for decades, that nothing mattered. To this day, I feel like an imposter, questioning what the hell do I know that can make a difference. But now I ask better questions, and that has made all the difference. I might not be able to save the world, but I affect the lives of the people around me in positive ways. And that is enough to start feeling better. And why does this crazy guy who spent 20 years being a recluse want to help others? Because I'm selfish. For most of my life, I felt the best I could do was to be the support staff, helping others with their dreams. That giving was more important than receiving. And serving others is important, but not for the reasons I thought. Not because being altruistic is the only way to reduce suffering and save the planet, but because I've come to realize that helping people doesn't have to be more complicated than sharing my own story and helping others share theirs. Because learning and teaching how to use our skills to help others is how I feel better about myself. It's not easy for me to open up to the world, to be vulnerable and go back to wearing my heart on my sleeve. But the risk of not taking action outweighs the risk of doing nothing. And though I might not be able to save the whole world, I can save a little piece of it. And that begins with sharing who I am with those who need to hear the story I have to tell.